The richest country on the planet continues to shine lights on skyscrapers, produce films, export technology, and fuel the idea that success is infinite. But behind this glittering facade, something is quietly beginning to crumble. The signs don't come in the form of explosions or sudden crises, but rather in everyday gestures. Parents who no longer eat dinner with their children, workers who sleep in their cars, families living on the surface while emptiness grows within. America still appears powerful, but its foundation is slowly eroding, corroded by an invisible exhaustion. What was once pride has become pressure, and what was once comfort has become a prison. The country that promised freedom now imposes daily races against the clock, bills that never balance, and a kind of poverty that doesn't show up in statistics, a poverty of time, meaning, and human connection. Cities remain full, but hearts are empty. Houses remain standing, but homes silently crumble. The bankruptcy that's unfolding isn't financial but emotional. It doesn't bankrupt companies, it destroys routines. It doesn't take possessions, it takes away peace. While the system repeats that everything is fine, millions feel as if something vital is being ripped away without them realizing it. And it is in this contrast between material abundance and the inner desert that the question arises that no one wants to face. How can such a rich country produce so much invisible misery? But the answer begins to appear when we observe everyday life. The symptoms of failure are everywhere, disguised as normality. If you want to understand what's really happening in America, beyond the statistics, beyond the headlines, subscribe to the channel now and leave a like. Here, we delve into the stories that explain why the map of the United States is changing and what this reveals about our own future. The United States continues to function. Factories produce, supermarkets are stocked, and advertisements still promote the image of a vibrant country. But one only needs to look closely to realize that something essential has fallen apart. America's collapse isn't announced in headlines. It's revealed in the small details, in the weary glances on the subway, in the interrupted conversations at the table, in the streets packed with cars driving exhausted people in circles. Modern life has turned survival into routine, and routine into anesthesia. The middle class, once a symbol of stability, now lives on the brink of emotional implosion. You work more, earn less, and owe triple the amount. Overtime is no longer a choice, but the only way to maintain the standards the system itself demands. Within homes, intimacy has been replaced by screens. Parents outsource their presence. Children learn to love through notifications. The silence between the walls is no longer one of peace, but of distance. Every week, new families break up without scandal or violence. They simply disappear amid haste, debt, and fatigue. What was once called the American dream has become a manual for emotional survival. The cities remain lit, but every illuminated window hides someone about to go out. And the most disturbing thing is that no one seems to notice, because modern collapse is subtle. It disguises itself as routine, wears suits, keeps schedules, and smiles in old photos. Have you noticed these signs where you live? Are the streets still breathing, or have they started to get sick too? Comment below. Behind every stagnant wage and every indebted family lies a never-stop gear. A system designed to appear natural, efficient, and meritocratic, but which in reality feeds on collective exhaustion. America's invisible bankruptcy was no accident. It was built over decades, driven by habits disguised as progress. Consumption has become synonymous with happiness and success with exhaustion. The more someone produces, the more debt they incur. The more they buy, the more they feel the void they're trying to fill. Corporations understood early on that fear is the economy's best fuel. Fear of losing status, jobs, respect. Families were trained to compete with each other, to turn life into a showcase. Advertising sold the idea that freedom is about choosing brands, and the financial system created enough credit for everyone to appear wealthy, even if only for a few days a month. Debt became a culture, fatigue became a virtue, and loneliness became an expected consequence. The cause isn't scarcity, but manipulation. Working tirelessly has been transformed into pride. Going into debt has been rebranded as investment, and genuine leisure has been replaced by digital distractions that keep the mind occupied and the soul empty. Meanwhile, the country that talks most about freedom is also the one with the least time to exercise it. People no longer own their own time, and when time ceases to belong to the individual, they become slaves to the system. But what happens when this gear starts to fail? When the effects of this collective fatigue stop being invisible and start spreading like cracks across the country? The effects of invisible bankruptcy are no longer a thing of the future. They materialize on the corners of big cities and in the alleys of small ones. In once prosperous neighborhoods, empty houses are sold for nominal sums, while entire families live in trailers or rented rooms at a premium. The collapse didn't arrive with sirens, it arrived with bills. It is silent, predictable, and managed in monthly installments. Human relationships are disintegrating at the same rate as the economy grows on paper. Anxiety is now the new national epidemic, and antidepressants have become the country's most profitable product. Work is no longer a means to an end, but an end. Rest is treated as a luxury, and socializing is a waste of time. In a country constantly on the run, no one asks where they're going anymore. The most alarming thing is that this erosion isn't just financial, it's spiritual, it's cultural. When haste becomes permanent, empathy disappears, and with it humanity. Each new generation grows more connected and paradoxically more alone. The consequences are there. Children who dream of stability, adults who know only fear, and elderly people who die unnoticed. The country that taught the world to win has forgotten what it means to live. Do you think this crisis can still be reversed? Or have we already crossed the point where collapse has become part of our way of life? Comment below. In the American Midwest, in a small industrial town forgotten by the economic map, lives Karen, a woman who represents millions. For 20 years, she believed that discipline and hard work were the path to success. She woke before sunrise, worked double shifts, and still found the strength to care for her home and children. But time, that invisible enemy, began to exact interest rates no bank could calculate. The first sign of bankruptcy didn't appear on her statement, it came in her soul, the day she realized she hadn't smiled in months. When the factory where she worked was automated, Karen received severance pay and an email thanking her for her services. Rent increased, food costs tripled, and her credit card became the only friend who responded. Her husband, consumed by frustration, turned to alcohol. The children, each on their own screen, learned to be absent even when present. The house, once full of voices, became a space where silence weighed more heavily than poverty. Karen still has a permanent address, but she's lost everything that sustained that home. Communication, hope, and the belief that tomorrow would be better. She's no exception. She's the portrait of a generation that works hard to stay afloat, yet still sinks. Her story isn't in the headlines, but it's on every street corner. The invisible collapse doesn't destroy buildings, it slowly destroys bonds until affection becomes a luxury. But behind these individual stories lies something even more disturbing, cold numbers that reveal the true scale of this silent failure. The numbers are cold, but they speak with a clarity that emotion sometimes obscures. In today's United States, 6 out of 10 citizens, they don't even have $1,000 in reserve for emergencies. 38 million regularly rely on food banks. Each year, the country records over $1.7 trillion in student debt, imprisoning young people before they even begin to live. And while the middle class shrinks, the richest 10% expand their wealth at a record pace, making inequality routine. These statistics don't appear in official speeches. They're masked by charts promising growth and campaigns celebrating consumption as a national victory. But behind the positive GDP figures lie indebted households, emotionally exhausted families, and an entire generation that no longer believes in its own future. American prosperity has become a hologram, visible from a distance, intangible up close. Mental health data completes the picture. Depression is on the rise, suicide rates among middle-aged adults are rising, and youth are growing up without prospects. Working more is no longer a path to advancement. It has become a means of survival. The average citizen pays for a lifestyle that makes them sick, and at the same time makes them feel guilty for not being happy. These numbers aren't just statistics, they're symptoms of a country that has forgotten to measure what truly matters. Because when success is measured solely in numbers, failure ceases to be the exception and becomes the rule. But if the present already seems unsustainable, what about the future? What happens when the society that taught the world to dream begins to wake up amidst the nightmare it created? Share your thoughts here. The American collapse won't come with wars or revolutions. It's already begun, and it manifests itself silently, inside homes, schools, and offices. The future won't be destroyed by bombs, but by an entire generation that has lost the ability to dream. The economy continues to grow, but people are shrinking. They work more, sleep less, feel more fear, and less sense of belonging. Progress has ceased to be a promise and has become a threat. Invisible bankruptcy is not a distant prediction, it is an ongoing process. When fear replaces hope as the driving force of society, time becomes a minefield. What was once a collective dream has become an individual survival. Cities are deliberately emptied, families are silently dissolved, and the country that was once a symbol of freedom is now a prisoner of its own haste. The most alarming thing is that no one seems willing to stop the machine. It already operates on its own, fueled by algorithms, credit, and fatigue. The coming decades will bring not only economic crises, but also an identity crisis, an entire nation trying to remember who it was before becoming hostage to its own success. The boundaries of this collapse are not geographic. They are psychological. Every person who gives up, who remains silent, who accepts life in exhaustion, reinforces the machinery that destroys the country. There is no visible enemy, only a system that turns citizens into replaceable parts. And when emptiness becomes culture, despair ceases to be the exception. The true collapse will not be the collapse of an economy, but the collapse of a collective consciousness. But there remains a question that echoes among the rubble of this frenetic routine. Is there still time to recover what was lost, or has silence already overcome the voice of those who try to resist? The invisible collapse of the United States didn't begin on the stock exchanges or in central banks. It began inside homes, when time stopped being shared and began to be sold in small, exhausting installments. It began when family dinners were replaced by rushing, when conversation became uncomfortable and silence became routine. The collapse didn't destroy cities, it destroyed homes. It didn't take wealth, it took connections. The empire that once built the greatest economic power on the planet now watches, unwittingly, the slow erosion of what sustained it, the sense of humanity. Behind the numbers, there's a poverty that doesn't show up in the statistics. Emotional poverty, the emptying of the senses, the inability to feel. A country can print money, but it can't print purpose. It can rebuild roads, but it can't rebuild trust. And when hope becomes a commodity, every achievement loses its luster, and success becomes just an elegant form of despair. There's still time to change, but the clock isn't ticking. Recovery doesn't begin with the stock market. It begins with families who still see eye to eye, with neighbors who still greet each other, with people who still believe that caring is an act of resistance. The new beginning lies in slowing down, listening, and remembering that the value of a life isn't measured in productivity but in presence. The richest country in the world is becoming poorer from within, and perhaps the real question isn't what happened to America, but what's happening to us. If this reflection made you think, share this video and subscribe to the channel. Here, each episode reveals what the media doesn't show, the stories, the signs, and the truths behind the modern collapse. Because understanding the end is the first step to not being part of it.